Okay, William. So this one is a bit more of a generic piece. Get into the races, not quite as it was as it is these days.
No, sort of getting and staying at the races, because now, of course, we're so used to sort of going to a race meeting in a car and heading off again, and in taking away some of the social fun of it, of course, especially after the Drink Drive Act of '67. But it was very, very different getting your horse to the race and getting yourself to the race, particularly before the advent of the railways. And sometimes the railways often would only take one so far anyway. Um, in the old days, of course, horses were walked between meetings, and one of the ways that meetings financed themselves and were put on by innkeepers was that horses would stay for about 10 days. And in fact, you had to stay anything from a week to 10 days at an inn that had subscribed to the races to be shod by a farrier that had subscribed to the races, etc. And one of the first revolutions in this came in 1836. Um, Lord George Bentinck, who was one of the dictators of the turf and pursued wrongdoers with great vigor, but only really in his own personal interest. And he was as keen a gambler and keen to defeat the bookmakers as anybody. And his greatest wheeze was with Elis, the winner of the 1836 St. Leger. Now, Elis was owned by Bentinck, but because his family, he thought, probably disapproved of him owning racehorses, his father, the Duke of Portland, he ran it in a couple of different names. But he was determined to get good odds from the bookmakers, and the horse was trained in Sussex by the Goters, and the normal thing was that this horse would have walked to the races miles and miles and miles over a period of several weeks. So 10 days to go to the Leger. Elis, who had run Bay Middleton, the best horse of the year, very, very close in the Guineas, but hadn't been entered in the Derby. He was in, but he'd won at Goodwood. He was one of the favourites for the Leger. But there he was. He wasn't there 10 days beforehand. So the bookmakers, the prices started going out. And of course, Bentinck started putting more and more money on, but the price kept going up because there he is 6 days beforehand, still no sign of Elis. What they hadn't realised is that Bentinck had built a horse box that was pulled by 6 horses. And he was, instead of walking his way, he was trundling his way over a period of a week or so towards Doncaster from Sussex. And he stopped off at Lichfield Racecourse, which is in volume 3. And in there is a beautiful picture of Lichfield Racecourse, actually with Lord Wilton, who was also a character, great, great character. Um, and sadly, the stand at Lichfield, would you believe, which was a Victorian building, not the one that Bentinck saw, has just been demolished for HS2. Absolutely unforgivable. But fear not, folks, there are photographs of it in volume 3. But anyway, he stopped off at Lichfield on the way to give the horse a gallop round. So he stayed there, gave the horse gallop, overnight stop, and then on to Doncaster. Absolute consternation of the bookmakers because there is Elis suddenly turning up. And sure enough, he won easily and Bentinck landed his bet. But most of the time, both people and horses had to get there a lot, involving a lot of walking one way or another. But one of the most unusual, and I only include this meeting in the book because of the amusing way in which the amateur rider and author Richard Maisie Thompson describes getting to a meeting in Cornwall at Landrake, which is actually not that far from Plymouth, where he was stationed. And little did he realize when he set off, and he went off on the train, and Brunel, there's near Landrake, there's the most fantastic viaduct that Brunel built as part of his Great Western Line. But when he got there, he was a bit there was a ferry to take everybody across the river for the last bit, but he was late. The train was late, fancy that, and he missed the ferry. So he had to get a local man with a sort of boat, basically. He was there with his pony and his trap, and the trap went on the little boat. The pony wasn't going to have any of it, and so how the hell was he going to get there? Because he needed the trap at the other end to go the last few miles. So this is how he then describes what he did. The cart was soon got on board, but in vain did we try every means in our power to get the pony into the other boat. but nothing would induce it to embark. At last, in despair, I suggested that we swim the pony over behind our boat, and after some demur it was acceded to, as no other means of crossing presented itself. To our surprise, the pony offered no resistance, and as soon as the boat began to recede from the shore, it followed us without any difficulty and swam beside us, while we guided it by the harness reins attached to the bridle. 3/4 of a mile was soon passed over, and we were quickly en route again for Landrig, but so much time had been lost that we feared we should never reach the course in time. Fortunately, our race was fixed for one of the last events, and we arrived when the preceding one was being run. Our difficulties, however, were not yet over, for we were immediately met by the lad who'd gone with Kildare, the name of the horse, there in the morning, saying he'd lost his way and he'd only just arrived himself, while Kildare had nothing to eat since he'd left his stable at 7 a.m. This was cheerful news, for it would never have done to feed him within a few minutes of his race, so we procured a bottle of ale and poured it down his throat. He seemed rather to like it, and the effect it speedily had upon him was most magical. Instead of looking rather weary and jaded, he became almost playful, stepping out as proudly as if he'd just come out of his stable. He ran too, as well as he looked, and taking the lead about halfway, he was never again approached and won easily by several lengths. Our return home was a triumphant one. The ferry boat had been repaired, and so it went on, and he got home safely. So it was always it could be quite an adventure getting to the races in those days, and it could be quite an adventure getting back, and we may discuss that in another little snippet.